They called her mad, a broken widow babbling to the stars, weeping for a mate they all said was long dead. Everyone turned away, mocking her, leaving her to cry alone in the cold night. But one human heard something different in her sobs, a trembling hope hidden in the madness. When he knelt down and truly listened, he discovered a secret that could shatter everything they believed. She wasn't mad, she was the only one telling the truth. And in that moment, he decided he wouldn't just listen, he would fight for her. They said she was mad, the alien widow with silver hair like drifting moonlight and eyes that shone like pale stars. The villagers called her the Screaming Shade, whispering that she had lost her mind after her mate disappeared during the last storm cycle. But no one knew her name anymore. No one wanted to remember her true voice. She was just a shadow they passed by, a wailing echo in the night that children were warned to avoid. She sat on the edge of the ruins each dusk, clutching a piece of dark, broken metal, the last fragment of her mate's ship. Her thin hands trembled as she whispered to it, her voice carrying on the wind like a forgotten prayer. Everyone claimed she was cursing the stars or reciting insane prophecies, but not one person had ever stopped to listen closely. The elders said she had refused food and warmth after he vanished, insisting she could still feel his presence just beyond the misty hills. Some believed she would eventually vanish too, like a stray fog at dawn. When the human, a lone trader named Ethan, arrived in the settlement, he heard the rumors immediately. As he unloaded crates of solar batteries and water filters, the market women warned him, "Don't go near the ruins after sunset. The mad widow haunts that place, calling out to her dead lover." They laughed as they said it, tossing handfuls of dried herbs into baskets and shaking their heads. Ethan felt a small shiver run down his spine, not of fear but of curiosity. That night, as he finished his last trade and watched the 3 moons rise, he heard it, a thin, aching wail that sounded less like madness and more like mourning. He followed the sound instinctively, guided by some force deeper than reason. The closer he came, the clearer her voice became, not a scream but a fragile, broken plea.
"Come home, please.
I can't hold on much longer. They call me mad, but I know you're close. I feel your warmth." Ethan stepped carefully, each footfall sinking into the soft, violet moss that grew around the ruins. He finally saw her, a thin figure hunched over a broken metal piece, her hair flowing around her like a shimmering veil. Her eyes were closed, her lips trembling as she pressed her forehead to the cold surface. He waited a moment before speaking. "Why do you sit here alone?" She flinched and turned, her eyes wide and luminous in the moonlight. For a heartbeat, fear flared across her face, then something else softer, almost desperate. "Go away," she said, voice shaking. "They all laugh. They don't believe. They think I've lost my mind."
"You will too."
Ethan shook his head slowly. "I don't think you're mad. I heard you. I think you're grieving." Her hands fell into her lap, fingers curling around the metal piece.
Her lips parted, but no words came.
A single tear slid down her pale cheek, catching the moon's glow before falling to the moss below. "They say he died," she whispered finally. "They say his ship exploded over the ocean. But I felt his last transmission. I felt his mind reach for me in the storm. They can't hear him, but I do. Every night, he calls to me, begging me not to forget him, begging me to help." Ethan stepped closer, dropping to one knee so their eyes met evenly. What if he really is out there? What if you're right?"
Her breath hitched. "No one says that. They mock.
They say I'm a ghost of my own past. But you believe me."
Ethan nodded once. "I do."
A strange glow rose in her eyes then, a fragile spark of hope that looked almost too delicate to survive the wind. She reached out, fingers trembling, and brushed the sleeve of his jacket as if testing whether he was real. "I can't find him alone," she said in a broken whisper. "I don't have the strength. My body is too weak now, my mind is fading, but I feel his last signal. It's like a thread. A tiny, thin thread tied to my heart." Ethan closed his hand over hers. "Then let me follow it with you. I have equipment, scanners, pulse readers, signal amplifiers. Maybe we can trace this thread together." She let out a strangled cry, half relief, half disbelief, and pressed her forehead against his hand. The metal fragment clattered to the moss, forgotten for a moment. For the first time in countless cycles, she felt warmth against her skin, a living, breathing warmth that didn't vanish like a dream. She sobbed against his palm as he gently stroked her hair. The next morning, the villagers stared as the human and the widow left together toward the eastern ridge. They whispered, called him foolish, even cursed him for wasting time with a lunatic. But Ethan ignored every word, his steps steady beside her slow, trembling ones. At the ridge, he set up his scanners, the devices humming and flashing as they swept the horizon. She watched with wide eyes, clutching the thread of her hope as tightly as her frail fingers would allow. Hours passed with no results, only static and wind howling over the peaks. Each failure seemed to crush her shoulders lower, until she was almost curled into herself, eyes dimming again. But Ethan wouldn't give up. He recalibrated, adjusted frequencies, amplified the signal range. Finally, near midnight, a soft beep echoed from the scanner, faint, distant, but unmistakably real. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening like a child's at the first snow. "There," Ethan breathed, leaning closer. "It's weak, but it's him, isn't it?" Her hands rose to her mouth, a sob tearing through her as she nodded violently. "Yes, yes, that's him, I knew it, I knew he was calling me." Ethan grabbed her shoulders gently, steadying her as her knees threatened to give out. "We can't reach him from here. But if we set up a relay, I can extend the signal, maybe even guide us to his last known coordinates." She didn't speak, she just clung to him, trembling so fiercely that Ethan had to hold her upright. All that night, they worked side by side, building the makeshift relay tower from scraps and spare antenna parts. She handed him tools, her thin fingers surprisingly deft despite her weakness. At every small success, she looked at Ethan as if he was a miracle, her lips forming silent thanks over and over again. When dawn finally broke, the scanner gave a stronger ping, a precise vector eastward, deep into the forested ravines. Her knees buckled in relief. "He's waiting, he's alive. I can feel it, I can feel him stronger now." Ethan caught her before she collapsed, lifting her carefully into his arms. "Rest. Save your strength. I'll carry you to the edge of the ravines. We'll bring him home together." She clung to his neck, her tears soaking into his collar. For the first time since her mate vanished, her heart beat with something other than grief, a fragile, bright hope that felt like starlight under her skin. As Ethan walked, she leaned her head against his chest, her voice a soft whisper. "Why did you listen to me when no one else did?" He glanced down at her, his eyes soft. "Because your pain was real. And no real pain deserves to be ignored." She closed her eyes then, letting the warmth of his heartbeat lull her into an exhausted half-sleep. When they reached the ravines, Ethan set her down gently and began to scan the rocky cliffs. The signal was erratic now, bouncing from wall to wall, but each ping grew stronger, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. She crawled forward despite her shaking limbs, reaching out to touch the scanner screen. There, that narrow pass, that's where he fell. Ethan moved without hesitation, climbing down the jagged rocks, ignoring the scrapes that opened along his arms. At the bottom, half buried under shattered branches and moss, lay a fragment of alien armor, and then farther in, a faint glow flickered.
Ethan called up to her.
"I see him, there's a life pod buried here." She let out a scream, a wordless sound that shattered the morning air. Her hands clawed at the rocks as she tried to descend herself, but her strength failed her halfway. Ethan scrambled back up, lifting her again and guiding her down carefully. When she saw the life pod, she broke into sobs so violent that she nearly stopped breathing. Ethan pried the hatch open, revealing a gaunt figure inside. Her mate, eyes barely open, skin pale and thin but alive. She collapsed against the pod, her hands flying to his face, her forehead pressing to his as she sobbed his name again and again. Ethan stood back, swallowing the lump in his throat as he watched their reunion. The mate opened his eyes fully then, whispering her name, a sound so weak it barely rose above the wind. But she heard it, every syllable a spark that reignited her heart. Ethan watched as the two clung to each other, their sobs mixing with the whisper of the forest. For a long while, he stood silently, guarding them as if they were the most precious treasure in the universe. When at last they could speak, she turned to Ethan, her eyes bright with tears. "You gave him back to me, you listened, you believed when no one else did." Ethan knelt beside them, smiling softly. "You already did the hardest part, you never stopped believing." Her mate's trembling hand reached out, covering Ethan's. A silent thank you passed between them, something deeper than any spoken word. She pressed her forehead to Ethan's again, her voice low but firm. "We will never forget you. You are family now. You are our bridge to the stars." In that moment, Ethan felt a warmth spread through him that no trade, no profit, no adventure had ever given him. He realized he hadn't just saved a life, he had helped heal a universe of grief trapped inside one loyal heart. As the three of them sat together at the base of the ravine, dawn breaking above them, Ethan knew he would never walk away. He had found a new home, not in a place, but in two souls who had almost been lost to the night forever. And above them, the rising sun shimmered like a promise, that no cry should ever be ignored, and that no heart should ever have to grieve alone. They sat together at the bottom of the ravine for a long time, the alien widow, her mate, and Ethan. The soft morning light wrapped around them like a gentle shawl, warming their trembling bodies and washing away the nightmare of countless cold nights. Ethan kept glancing at the mate's face, memorizing the fragile spark of life returning to his eyes. Every few minutes, the alien woman would reach up to touch her mate's cheek again, as if reassuring herself he was truly there and not a spirit about to vanish on the wind. She murmured his name in a language Ethan didn't know. Each syllable sounded like a song, like distant chimes echoing across stars. At one point, the mate tried to lift a hand to her face, but his strength faltered. She caught his hand instantly, holding it against her chest. Her silver hair fell forward, brushing his forehead as she whispered again and again, "I'm here, I'll always be here, you came back to me." Ethan stood up, stretching his stiff limbs and studying the slope above them. The ravine was steep and jagged, but with careful planning, they might carry him up. He began gathering branches and vines, weaving them into a makeshift stretcher. Each time he turned back to check on them, he saw her eyes following his every move, no longer empty, but burning with a quiet determination. She helped as much as she could, passing vines, tying knots with shaking fingers. Every task seemed to give her purpose again, as if rebuilding her faith piece by piece. When they finally laid her mate gently onto the stretcher, she bent over him, brushing dirt from his face and kissing his forehead. "He will live," she whispered, half to Ethan and half to herself. "We will make him live, together." Ethan nodded, tightening the knots and testing the balance. He looped one end of the stretcher straps around his shoulders. "Ready." She placed her small hands on the stretcher's edge and looked into Ethan's eyes. For the first time, there was no hesitation, only a silent promise of unwavering strength.
"Yes," she said. "Take us home." It was a brutal climb.
The rocks bit into Ethan's hands and knees, the vines cut into his shoulders, and sweat soaked his clothes. More than once he nearly lost his footing, and each time her sharp gasp rang out behind him. But he always regained balance, his grip firm. She followed beside him, steadying the stretcher, whispering quiet words to her mate, urging him to hold on. Finally, they reached the ridge. Ethan collapsed on the moss, gasping, his arms shaking from exhaustion. She dropped beside him, pressing her forehead to his shoulder in silent gratitude. The mate let out a weak, strained breath, his fingers curling slightly, a small but unmistakable sign of life. From the ridge, they could see the distant lights of the settlement, small points glowing under the wide star-dotted sky. She turned to Ethan, her eyes shimmering with tears and relief.
"They will mock me again," she said softly.
"They will call me mad even now, they won't understand how close we came to losing him forever." Ethan took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Let them say what they will.
You know the truth.
You saved him." She looked down at their joined hands, then back at him.
"No, we saved him."
They rested for a few more moments before starting the slow walk home. The wind carried the scent of the sea and the forest, mixing into a sharp, bittersweet perfume that made her think of every night she had waited alone. Each step felt like crossing a new threshold, leaving behind the years of grief and stepping into a new dawn. When they arrived at the village edge, the first people to see them stopped in shock. Children ran to fetch the elders, their eyes wide and scared. The traders dropped their baskets. The healers clutched their shawls. In minutes, a crowd gathered, pressing closer with each heartbeat. An elder finally stepped forward, his voice trembling with disbelief. It can't be, that's her mate." She stood straight, her silver hair whipping around her in the breeze like a living banner. Her gaze swept the crowd, unwavering, unafraid. "He was alive," she said clearly, her voice ringing like a temple bell. "All these years, you called me mad, you laughed, but I heard him. I never stopped hearing him." Silence rippled through the gathering. A woman near the front fell to her knees, weeping openly. Another man covered his mouth with shaking hands. A child clutched at her mother's leg, staring wide-eyed at the pale figure on the stretcher. Ethan stepped forward, lifting his chin.
She was right.
Every signal, every whisper she felt, it was real. And none of you listened. An elder tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. Finally, he dropped to his knees, head bowed low. One by one, the others followed, until only Ethan and the widow stood tall. She stepped closer to the stretcher, her hands brushing her mate's forehead again. Then she turned, her eyes locking on each face in the crowd. "Compassion is not madness," she said. "Love is not madness. You turned away from what you did not understand, but he didn't." She pointed to Ethan, her voice rising.
"This human listened. He believed. He saved us both."
Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. In that moment, he wasn't just an outsider, a passing trader. He had become part of her story, their story. She knelt by her mate again, whispering soft words, each one a thread binding him back to life. Slowly, his eyes opened wider. He focused on her, then turned to Ethan. With effort, he raised a trembling hand toward him. Ethan knelt, grasping the frail fingers gently. The mate's eyes glistened, and though no words came, gratitude poured from him like a warm sunrise. She wrapped her arms around them both, her forehead pressed against Ethan's shoulder. "We will never forget you," she whispered. "You are our bond now. Our family." Ethan closed his eyes, breathing in the moment, the scent of moss and salt air, the warmth of her embrace, the fragile strength of her mate's hand. For the first time since leaving Earth, he felt truly anchored. The healers finally stepped forward, offering help. Together, they carried the mate to a small healing house near the edge of the settlement. Ethan and the widow walked behind them, side by side. The villagers cleared a path, heads bowed in silent apology. Inside the healing room, she sat at her mate's side, never letting go of his hand. Ethan stood nearby, organizing supplies, checking pulse monitors, moving as if he had always belonged there. When the mate drifted into a healing sleep, she finally stood and approached Ethan. Her eyes were weary but bright, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. She reached out, brushing his cheek with her fingertips. "You gave me back my universe," she whispered. "You didn't just listen, you acted. You fought for him when even I was losing strength. You are more than a friend. You are my brother, my family, my anchor." Ethan covered her hand with his own. "You gave me something too. I've traveled my whole life, never staying anywhere, never letting anyone close. But you showed me what it means to belong." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his.
"Then stay. Stay with us. We have lost enough.
We don't want to lose you too." A soft exhale escaped Ethan's lips. He hadn't realized how much he longed to hear those words, to be needed, to be wanted, not just for trade but for his heart.
"Yes," he said. "I'll stay."
She broke into silent tears again, pressing her hands to his shoulders as though grounding herself in his presence. Behind them, the mate stirred, shifting in his sleep, his fingers twitching as if reaching out for her. In the days that followed, the settlement began to change. Whispers turned into quiet apologies, suspicion into offerings of food and help. The children no longer hid when they saw her. They brought small flowers and pieces of polished shell, leaving them outside her door. The elders asked for her forgiveness, bowing deeply when she passed. Ethan stayed by her side every day, helping her care for her mate, teaching the villagers how to use his scanning equipment. He helped rebuild her small home, patching cracks and weaving new thatch for the roof. When her mate finally gained enough strength to walk outside, the whole village gathered. They watched him step into the light, leaning heavily on her arm but standing tall. She turned to the crowd, lifting his hand high. "He is here," she declared, her voice firm and clear. "Alive because we believed, because one human listened when none of you would. Remember this, never close your ears to another's cry, no matter how strange it sounds.
Listen. Always listen."
The villagers lowered their heads, many weeping openly. That evening, the three of them sat together on the rebuilt porch, watching the stars wheel across the sky. The widow leaned against her mate's shoulder, his hand resting over hers. Ethan sat beside them, sharing a bowl of warm broth. After a long silence, she turned to Ethan with a small smile. "Do you hear them tonight?" Ethan tilted his head, listening. In the wind, he heard soft echoes, almost like distant singing, not frightening but gentle and familiar.
"I do," he said softly. "It's beautiful."
She nodded, eyes half closed. "They're no longer calls of grief. They're songs of reunion, songs of hope. Because someone listened." Ethan leaned back, watching the stars. In that moment, he realized he was exactly where he was meant to be, not drifting through space in search of profit, but anchored here, among two souls who had chosen him as family. As the night deepened and the wind grew softer, they stayed close together, wrapped in blankets and each other's warmth. For the first time in many years, the alien widow slept without nightmares, her mate's heartbeat steady against her cheek. And Ethan, once a restless wanderer, finally closed his eyes with a quiet, peaceful smile, knowing he had not just saved a life but helped rebuild an entire universe of love. Above them, the stars shimmered like countless watchful eyes, a quiet promise that no one would be left alone again.